Okay. There we are.
We are every month. This is what happens.
Like, just like, is it going to work?
Right. All right. So everybody, happy Monday and happy Winephabet Street Day. Today, the letter of the day is I, and we are talking about Indigenous yeast today. And we have a special guest, but we're going to start off with a quick introduction. So those of you who don't know me, if this is your first time, my name is Lori. I am a graduate of UC Davis winemaking program. I have a WSET level 2 distinction and song service. And I am also owner, along with my husband, of Dracaena Wines, and we focus in on Cabernet Franc. Deb?
I am Debbie Giaquindo. I'm a certified specialist of wine and a wine location specialist in port and champagne. I blog under Hudson Valley Wine Goddess. I'm author of the book Tapping in the Hudson Valley, Day Trips and Weekend Itineraries to the Hudson Valley. And I am co-owner of or partner in Kitchen 330, which is a restaurant in Stone Harbor that hopefully soon one day we will be opening our dining room, but we're still doing takeout. So I think that's pretty much me in a nutshell. And I want to introduce you to Guy Picar. He's with Father and Daughter Cellars. He is our guest today for the letter I for Indigenous yeast. And Guy, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. We're located in the Anderson Valley. I moved up here about 13 years ago now. I met my wife, whose family had a vineyard in the Anderson Valley. I initially moved up here. I bought an inn at that time. So we got married, and our daughter, Ella, was born in 2012. The family had always sold their fruit from the Farrington Vineyard to other winemakers in the past. They'd never made their own wine from the vineyard, and we decided we would make a Pinot to celebrate Ella's birth. And it gradually grew from there. Now we do a number of varietals and a blend and a rustic sparkling.
And I have to say, so for everybody who is watching, right?
Yeah.
This is the 2016 Ellis Reserve, and I adore the label. Like,
I love the label.
I absolutely love it.
I have the Sarah, but I love that.
So, and Guy, we want to thank you for sponsoring this episode of Winephabet Street. We are so excited to have you on and to learn about fathers and daughters cellars and about your wine, the wines, and obviously about Indigenous yeast. And I'm pretty interested because at the back of the label, I mean, there's like cool information on the back label also, like clones and everything. So I'm so excited. So before we get into the actual interview, we'll start with our video. Sound good?
Let's go. It's in there.
All right, so welcome to Winephabet Street officially. And Guy, we probably should have told you this, but we get really excited at the time after the song, because after the song comes on, that means we get to drink.
Yes.
So
I wish I could join you.
All right, so we get to pour a glass of Fathers and Daughters Cellars. And
so
as
I have the Sarah, which is the pet nat.
Okay. And as I said, I have the 2016 Pinot Noir. So very, very excited.
Cheers.
Mancha.
Well, it's interesting that the Pet Nat is our really fun wine. And I'm not sure how many of your listeners are familiar with Pet Nats. When we decided to make one, we had Chardonnay fruit and we wanted to make something, but we didn't have the background, the space, or the time to do a method champenois. So our winemaker suggested a Pet Nat, which at that time in 2016 was becoming quite popular, an old style method of making a sparkling. So we did that. The first year, our 2016, which I think was probably the most phenomenal year. Unfortunately, we hadn't controlled the problem with gushing, which we figured it out, and we got that under control in 2017. But for those who aren't familiar with a pet nat, it's pressed and bottled and capped. It's not disgorged. There's no dosage added. So it'll drink in between a cider and a sparkling. There's our crown cap. And it's our go-to wine. When we sit out in the back deck at our house in the evenings, you kick our feet up and we pour a glass of that, and it goes down too easy. That's the problem.
That, sometimes you got to live with the problems.
Sometimes you do. And then our 2016 Pinot, that's our Ellis Reserve. It's our fourth vintage of that Pinot. We pick from the same blocks at the Farrington Vineyard every year. Our winemaker, we selected initially when we started making the Pinot because he was known for making Pinots you can lay down. And our objective in that first vintage was to make a Pinot we could lay down as long as possible so that our daughter hopefully could have it when she's like her mom on her 14th birthday, but 21. And Phil has a very light hand in the winemaking and in all of our varietals and blends. He uses very little new oak. We pick it at a little bit higher acid level, so our Pinots are Pinots that you can lay down for a little bit longer than normal.
Well, I'm going to say the Pinot, we normally do like our tasting a little bit later, but
we start to drink now and we go into the tastings later, but no, that's all right.
It is beautiful. The aromas, first of all, the color, and it never comes out nicely on the computer, but it is a beautiful ruby, medium light ruby. But the aromas are so pronounced. I mean, I don't even have to get it under my nose. It's like, a foot away, and I can smell, I can smell that there's cherry, there's pomegranate, there's a floral essence there also, which, as we continue, it might pop in my head what it actually is. But the flavors are all the same. But cherry to me is the predominant flavor, and after you swallow, it just stays on your tongue. Like my little happy place. I can just sit here and enjoy the wine, even though it's very long finish.
Those are signatures of Farrington Vineyard: the black cherry and the pomegranate.
Okay.
There's another vineyard up near the Anderson Valley in Comchie called the Oppenlander Vineyard, and those are the two vineyards that I can taste across winemakers and pick them out without question. The signatures are so unique for those two vineyards.
Well, I'm going to have to hit up more of that vineyard because this is this is right up my alley. This is beautiful. And
Phil makes the Pinot in a very Burgundian style, which is markedly different from the Russian River Valley Pinots just over the hill in Sonoma. Theirs are much bigger Pinots. These are very light. They're feminine. They're elegant Pinots up in the Anderson Valley.
Absolutely, but it has such a nice acidity to it, and that's where I'm agreeing with you that you're spot on. That this is beautiful drinking right now, but this can lay down still.
Lori, what's the alcohol content in yours?
I think 13.8, is that right? Or 13.9?
Oh, it's gold on. Oh, my bad eyes. I think you're 13.8.
It's between 0.8 and 0.9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. My bad eyes. Sorry.
There, you want my glasses?
There it is, 13.8. I just had to focus a little bit more. It is 13.8. But the acidity that is in there is so interwoven into the flavors that this has years on it that you can lie down and enjoy. And at the same time, like I said, it's very drinkable right now. It's lovely.
Most Pinots 5 to 7 years for their peak. This one will go 10 years probably on our 16. I think you're going to be in the sweet spot between 6 to 7 and 10 years on this one. Even though it drinks really nice right now. When we make the Pinots, we will generally have them in barrel between 18 and 22 months.
Okay.
And we'll lay it down for a year before we release it. So right now, at Father's Day of this year, we'll be releasing our 2017, and that'll have been in barrel for 22 months and then laid down for a year.
Okay, and Father's Day. Purposely, I'm guessing, right?
Yep.
So on the back, it says clones 2A, Pommard 828 and 667.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Pommard, my radar goes off for that. That is one of my favorites. And 667, I have seen, but I don't see very much of. I'm not that familiar with that. Is your Pinot, Ellis Reserve, is it always those same clones?
No, generally it will always have the Pommard in it. We usually have the 667 2A. Sometimes we'll have 777 in it. Sometimes we'll have 828. But the Pommard is what gives it the body. And the interesting thing is we're adding another Pinot. We added another Pinot in 2018. That's in barrel now. We'll be bottling that at the end of this month from a vineyard about 1,600 feet above Farrington, Roma's vineyard, which is an all Pommard vineyard. So it'll be our first single clone Pinot that we do.
Oh my God, what is that tasting like in barrel?
Yeah. Oh, we barrel sampled it at the Pinot Fest last year, and it was great then, and it is amazing now. I mean, it's very, very light. It's a very light Pinot, lighter than the one that you're drinking now, but it just has that body to it. It's just great.
Oh, well, sign me up. If you need a taster.
And it's interesting what the difference in elevation does to the wine, to the finished wine. It's a little bit more minerally. Up on that ridge top, there's a lot of wind, and it's a very different wine from the one down at the valley floor, 1,600 feet below it. But it's really good.
I mean, I would assume that the temperature is different. That's a significant amount to have. So you're harvesting at two very different times, probably.
It's funny down at Farrington. What we have to protect against are deer and wild boar. Up at the top and the ridge top at Roma's, what they have to protect against are bear.
Oh.
They don't have a problem with the deer, no problem with the boars, but they have problems with bear.
Wow, smart bear.
Pardon me?
I said they were smart bear.
Yeah.
Smart bear, yeah.
Yeah.
So
wow.
here's my pet nat.
Mm-hmm.
And what some people might not know that might be, listening to this broadcast after is, what is a pet nat? Because it's just recently that it kind of exploded, the pet nats with the, you bottle it before the first fermentation ends. This is done with, you can see that it's cloudy.
Right. So, Guy, you had mentioned that, you don't disgorge it. Go further into that. What is, you explained your pet nat, but do you know where the pet nat thing came from? And why, why do you think it's such a new fashion thing to do?
Well, my understanding, and it's from articles I've read and from what our winemakers told me, is that it's the oldest style of making a sparkling wine. And it was done in the villages in France, just as a celebration at the end of the harvest. What I like about it is, and the one that you're drinking right now, I think pairs really well with breakfast pastries. Anything
I can see where it will do that.
The crazy thing, we were going down to port an event in San Francisco, and on the way down, we passed a Krispy Kreme donuts. We picked up a dozen Krispy Kremes and we cut them into little bites. I swear to God, the best pairing. If you didn't get wine pairings, you get it when you do that. It's really fun. It's a fun wine. And what's neat about pet nats is that they are so different from winemaker to winemaker.
Oh, definitely. Actually, I'm going to tell you, this is one of the better pet nats that I've had.
Oh, that's great to hear.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's got the nose. You can smell a little citrus, melon, and there's just like, it's like a hint of like toast, but just very, very, very faint. So it's it's really, really nice. And on the palate, it's really kind of smooth, very nice mouthfeel, beautiful mouthfeel. There's melon, more green melon. I get a little citrus, maybe a hint of tangerine on it. It's not sweet, but there's a sweetness to it where I can see where it would pair extremely well with the pastries you were talking about.
You bet.
It's just
the first year and the 17 were dry. This one's a little bit more off dry. The fruit for this one, the Chardonnay, came from Roederer, which is, they have vineyards next to Farrington, and then down the road where they have their tasting room, they have vineyards there as well. And we were really happy with this 2018.
It's really nice. It's well balanced. It's really, I can see how after a day sitting on the porch, drinking it, and I can see where it'd be a nice breakfast wine. It would go well with also, I think, a nice, quiche with Swiss cheese in it, and it's really quite nice.
The pet nats are interesting. They're very tricky. Bill, our winemaker, we were just having a discussion about this the other day, because you have to capture it at exactly the right moment.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because it's got to be bottled at a certain point. I would think if it goes over it, it's, or under it, it's just not right,
And where we make our wines, up at Phil's Winery, that's up in the Mendocino Ridge, which is also at about 1,700 feet up. He has no chilling there. So it makes it a little bit more challenging.
My face went.
Yeah.
Well, this is the coolest place this is what you imagine making wine would be like. It's in an old barn. It's up on a mountaintop. He cobbles together the machinery. He's like a little scientist. He scrambles over these barrels. It is so much fun. If you didn't even know anything about wine, you would be so excited after spending about 15 minutes with Phil in the barrel room. So, but it is, he said, it is the trickier of the wines that he makes is this pet nat.
Yeah, and mine is 13, I believe, 0.9.
Yeah, that's
percent.
Because most Tibetha Champenois is down 11%. So this has more alcohol content, and it, like I said, it goes down really easy, so it can catch you.
It's really a nice wine. Kudos.
Thank
Now,
you.
do you make a Chardonnay also?
We do. The wines that we make, and we don't make every varietal every year. We'll make a Chardonnay, a Gewürztraminer, a Pinot, a Sauvignon Blanc, a white blend of the three, of the Chardonnay and the Gewürztraminer and the Sauvignon Blanc, called the Dance. And then we do the Pet Nat, and we do the every so often we'll do a cider, a hard cider.
Okay.
Our vineyard manager's name is Norman Kobler, and his family was one of the original winemaking families in the valley. And he said in 2016, he said, we've got 50 apple trees here on the vineyard. Let's make a cider. So we made it, and we called it Apple Kobler after. a good idea.
I love it. I love it.
So
So
our ones we definitely do every year is we always do the Sauvignon Blanc. They're from 50-year-old vines. It has a different profile than any other Sauvignon Blanc in the Anderson Valley. Slightly floral, a little bit exotic. It's really cool. That's probably our best seller. We make the Gewürztraminer usually every other year, and the Alsatian varietals do extremely well in the valley. Even though the valley is known for the Pinot, I think it's the Alsatian varietals that really are the stars up there.
Great.
Awesome.
So before we, in the past like 3 weeks, we're drinking a lot. Let's face it, we've been in quarantine, right? So I've taken like quite notes to some of the wines that I've been drinking. So I found indigenous yeast, called ambient yeast, feral yeast, wild yeast. I mean, it comes, and I don't think people realize it comes in all these different terms.
Yep.
On the back of the label. And can you go into, why you decided to do your wines with indigenous yeast?
Well, our winemaker had his training in Burgundy.
Oh.
And everything kind of stems from his training over there. And there they want the fruit to shine through. They want it to be reflective of the terroir. And he started out with indigenous yeast, and that's what he's used ever since. What I thought before I had my in-depth education prepping for this with Phil is I always thought the indigenous yeast referred to the yeast in the winery's facility. And I thought, well, it's cool because he's got this old barn. We probably couldn't replicate this anywhere else. But what I learned is that it's primarily the yeast that comes in on the fruit. Mm-hmm. And what he refers to the yeast that present, or the yeast varieties, I guess, that are present at the winery, is he refers to those as the finishing yeast. Those have a higher tolerance for alcohol. So as the yeast that comes in on the fruit dies off, as the alcohol content goes up, it's the finishing yeast from there at the winery that takes over. And he thinks it's that combination that gives the flavor profile to our wines.
So it's very house style, basically. When you're dealing with indigenous yeast, you're picking from a specific vineyard. So the yeast are basically there. But what is in your winemaker's name was Phil? Is that what you
Phil.
said?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So what Phil's talking about is inside the winery. That's a house. I call it the house account.
Yes.
And you know what you're getting in that house account in those yeasts. So they are the finishing yeast. I like how he says that they are the finishing yeast, because one of the biggest problems with indigenous yeast, or using indigenous yeast as your starter, is a stuck fermentation. Mm-hmm. Because you're not sure what you're getting because they're feral, they're out there. So you want to be able to, have a little, extra push in the end if need be, and that's what the house yeast do.
He was telling me that the yeast that come in from the vineyard, he said, it's like from Farrington, he said, are very consistent year in and year out. And he says a lot that has to do with the farming techniques that are employed at the vineyard. And he said there are vineyards that he has had fruit from before where the farming techniques are inconsistent and the yeast is inconsistent, and he drops those vineyards because he needs to be able to count on the farming practices being consistent year in and year out.
Yeah.
In the making of the wines. And he said he initially, when he came back from Burgundy, he worked with his father who had been in the winemaking industry in Napa for many years. And his dad was always worried about the stuck fermentations. But Phil says what he's learned over the years is that you just give it a little bit of time, and then the finishing yeast from the winery itself takes over. So he says he hasn't, as long as the vineyard is consistent in their farming practices and the yeast that comes in on the fruit is consistent, he said he hasn't ever had to worry about a stuck fermentation.
Guy Michael has a question. He wants to know how much of the flavor comes from the grapes of the Anderson Valley versus the yeast.
That's a good question. I think that the yeast is the polish on the fruit that comes in, but the fruit is the structure, is the profile of the wine more than anything else.
But I'm gonna guess or state that your pet nat that's because it's on the lees and you're not disgorging. The flavors you're getting in that pet nat are the Chardonnay plus more so than your reds probably because they're hanging out on the lees for so long.
And on our pet nat, we've used Farrington fruit and we've used Roederer fruit. So the Roederer and the 2018 is like I said, more off dry. Mm-hmm. And Phil could probably, I'm sure, tell you what causes the difference, but my guess is the fruit and the farming techniques there are different than Farrington. Our Farrington was a drier pet nat. And that I think is going to vary a little bit more from year to year just because of the kind of the rustic method it's made in.
So your first vintage, Phil has been your winemaker from the get-go?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We got really lucky because we're on the same wavelength with the style we were looking for and the style that he does. He's been incredibly great to work with. And he doesn't craft wines for score. So we occasionally will submit our wines for scoring. We got a double gold in the Pinot in 2014 from Sunset. We're always usually gold in the Chronicle wine competition, but he doesn't make the wines for score. He makes the wines to stand up over time. And it's not, so we've also learned with the Pinots is that we hold back on submitting them if we're going to submit them for a score for a few years longer because they're young. Usually, it always surprises me when people are releasing, like right now they're releasing the 2018 Pinots. And I'm thinking, that's just too early. It just seems like it to me. I think we're fortunate in that when we started, we weren't depending on this for a living. So we had the luxury of allowing them to age a little longer before releasing them. And now that we're in that mode, it works out great for us. But if we had to try to get in that from the get-go,
right,
and we were dependent on this for our income, I don't think we could have done it.
Right, absolutely. So when you're starting the winery, that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand is there's so much upfront cost to start off with. And that first vintage, you can't even collect a penny for a minimum of 2.5 years later.
Yep.
But you're already 2.5 years right?
That's right.
Made that hurdle, right? Now you're holding your years. You're releasing every year. So it's a little, it's just that big hurdle to start off with of what's going on. So
we were lucky. My wife's dad is one of the fathers and daughters, staked us for the first 2 years, which allowed us to get on our feet and get going. We only do about 500 cases total production a year. So we're a very small winery.
And is that where you want to remain? So, do you envision a little bit bigger?
I'd say we would probably be between 500 and 1,000 cases.
Okay.
Somewhere in there.
Okay. And do you have a tasting room?
We don't.
You don't. Okay.
And I'll tell you, we were primarily restaurants and stores in Mendocino County.
Okay.
And then the pandemic hit, and that went from 95% to zero very fast. And so we had to scramble and develop some direct-to-consumer sales. And we've been very fortunate in that because we had wine in barrels that we needed the income that stopped to be able to bottle in June.
Right.
So we scrambled, and thanks to my wife, who is very talented and great on social media, and a little bit of luck, we've been able to pull together enough to bottle our wine.
Beautiful. Congratulations.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's a rough thing. You know, Debbie owns the restaurant, so she's
Yeah.
seeing
It's
from the other end.
it's really tough right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm actually in New Jersey at the moment. That's where my restaurant is, and we can only do takeout.
Yep.
It's killing us.
Yeah, we have an inn down here in Mendocino as well, and I know we haven't purchased any wine for the inn since March 18th, and I know that our distributor for up here in Mendocino Lake and Sonoma counties hadn't placed any orders until last week.
Oh, good.
It's to go, and even though, pardon me,
At least they placed the order. Like
thank
it's not.
God.
Yeah.
Yep, it's tough.
So just like getting back to indigenous yeast. So my undergrad, basically, I have a undergrad and a graduate degree in biology, and my job originally was microbiology. So this is my geekdom here. This is, like yeast. At one point, I literally could be handed a petri dish, smell it, and tell you what the yeast was, which is a great parlor trick, but nobody ever wants you to do it. But so has your lab people ever plated out your yeast that are coming in to identify them? So do you know what your feral yeast are?
No, he's never plated it out. He said that if he ever had an issue, he would plate it out, but it's worked so well that he's never done that.
Never. Okay. I would be like all itchy. So tell him he doesn't want to do it, because I'll come there with my petri dishes and PDA plates, and I will swab everything.
You would have so much fun geeking out at this winery, let me tell you.
Yeah, I definitely would. It just, like, the concept of what this little, microorganism can do to an end product, good or bad.
Have you ever had any stuck fermentations or any mishaps that the indigenous yeast just,
No, it was not with our wines.
Uh-huh.
Phil he has his own label, and then he makes wines for a couple of labels besides ours. And he's had it with fruits from vineyards that we don't use, but that happens once and he won't use the vineyard again.
Okay.
The farming practice has to stay consistent. And what's interesting, something I didn't know about yeast, and you probably know this being geeked out on yeast, but not just one strain of yeast that comes in from the vineyard, but lots of different strains. And I think you would ask me a question about, are the yeasts the same that come in like on the Sauvignon Blanc and come in on the Pinot? And what he told me is that all the strains are present at the vineyard, but some strains thrive better on one type of varietal than they do on another type of varietal. And he said it may have to do with the porosity of the skin on the fruit. He said there may be a lot of factors, but although all the same yeasts are present, it's not the same yeast that take hold on each varietal, not the same mix.
Right. Okay, so I don't know if you can answer this, but since you're relying on your vineyard yeast, is your practice of farming any different than a winery that is are you concerned about sulfuring or things like that? What you're doing in the vineyard?
Yeah. So what do you look for in the vineyard, that makes working with this vineyard special to achieve your outcome?
Well, the vineyard manager, Norman, grew up in vineyards with his family who had Lazy Creek Winery up in the valley. And he is, if you were going to be stuck on a desert island with somebody, Norman is the guy you want to be stuck on it with, because he is the most skillful, innovative, creative person. He can fix, he can do anything. And he is absolutely passionate about the farming practices for a vineyard. And he meticulously takes care of our vineyard. It's interesting because to get to our vineyard coming off of Highway 128, you go up this road and you pass vineyards on the right and on the left, and then you get to Farrington. And the difference between how those vineyards look at any point during the year and how Farrington looks are day and night, just day and night. I mean, from the way that the fields are tilled and the vines are pruned, and when they do that, and what they and the cover crops that they plant in there. I mean, it's just meticulous, and I think that's probably, if I had to guess, the reason why the yeast stays consistent year to year, and it's what Phil thinks.
Absolutely, you've got to take care of the vineyard. It's a living thing, so if you're meticulous in what you're taking care of, if you're lackadaisical, it's not going to be consistent. It's going to be really kind of more along the lines of survival of the fittest. And typically in winemaking, survival of the fittest might not always be the best thing.
Well, I also think part of the reason is that Sarah's dad built housing at the vineyard for some of the vineyard crew, and so we have a consistent vineyard crew year in and year out. You know, they'll bring in additional people during harvest, but the people that tend to the vineyard throughout the year are the same people. They don't have to bring them in. They're not going around and spending their time at other vineyards. They're dedicated to Farrington.
That's nice.
That helps.
So my other question is, in terms of like indigenous yeast, not that every winery deals with a cold soak, but a cold soak is very, it helps with coloration of wine and all of that. But with indigenous yeast, a cold soak is going to delay the start of fermentation. So do you not do cold soak, or really impacted? It just is a little bit slower and then it kicks in.
Phil doesn't do a forced cold soak because it takes the natural yeast a few days to get going. What he asks for is that the fruit is picked in the after 11 p.m. and before 4 a.m. in the coldest hours of the night, and then it's trucked immediately up to the winery. So it's usually at the winery by 5 a.m., maybe 6 at the latest. So he doesn't have to do a forced cold soak. It's cold when it gets there.
Awesome. Yeah, because I think that I heard. I mean, we don't use indigenous yeast, but I think that a cold soak would affect the indigenous yeast, affect them, but it kind of like staggers the fermentation. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the heart to have that stagger.
Now, you said that you make a cider every now and then. Do you make the cider with indigenous yeast as well?
It is. And the cider, Phil doesn't make the cider for us. There was a gentleman that made it for us in conjunction with Norman. So I asked him to give me the feedback on the cider, since that was a process that neither one of us are very familiar with. But I got some notes here.
Okay, bring it on.
So you had asked if the cider process was different,
right?
From the grapes to the apples, and the skin and the fruit conditions are different. And Alex was the cider maker for us, Alex Krangle, and he says he believes that the sub-base yeast is different as well. He said the acid levels in the apple is nowhere near what it is in the grapes. He said there's more malolactic acid in the apples. He said the yeast that takes hold and becomes active is different as a result of that than it is in the grapes. And and the contact time in the skin is similar to the contact time with white wine.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's all I know about the cider.
No, that's cool. That's
Our cider is a very dry style cider. It's similar in some ways to a Belgian beer, I guess.
okay. Now, with the cider, is that just bottled in like normal size bottles, or like, can I come on and get a growler of that?
The last two vintages we did, we bottled in 750s. But I think that this year we're going to, or the next time that we do the cider, I don't know if we're doing it this year, we're going to do it in splits.
Okay.
That seems to be more demand for splits than the larger bottle sizes.
Oh, I could be drinking an entire bottle of that. That could be dangerous.
So are you a cider person?
I am a cider person. I am a huge cider person. So by us, because I'm originally from New Jersey, so by Debbie, they have in the Hudson Valley, they're the cider house. I'm sure I've hit every single one. Pretty sure.
I'll send you both out a bottle of the cider so you can try it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm going to send you our 16 cider, just because when we were bottling that, I had to scramble to get glass for it, and we ended up with a really cool looking bottle. So I'll send you the 16.
Oh, very cool.
Thank you.
So
we were drinking cider actually Friday night in the kitchen because we were so busy.
I have a bunch of collection or whatever. So I have a whole bunch of bottles that are special. So after I'm sure I will very easily empty that bottle, I will make sure it stays up in that area too.
This will be unique among the bottles you have up there. I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And I can relate to concerns of bottling. Our last vintage of bottling, the bottles arrived at like 9 in the morning, and we bottled at 1 in the afternoon.
Wow, that's cutting it close.
Yeah. It was not meant to be that close. It was like
it's challenging. Right now for this year, we've scrambled to get the glass there in time. We're bottling later than we normally do because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It slowed down the production lines at the place we secure glass from, and the cork factories. So yeah, we're bottling probably about a month and a half later than we normally would.
Yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking.
And for us, we have to get the glass farther out because we don't do labels. Well, we did it for the pet nap, but the rest of our bottles are all screened. And so
I have to say, I love your labels. It just really, it's perfect.
Thank you.
And, I look at the rustic, and I'm thinking of me, my mother, and my father just walking, because there's 4 years age difference between me and my brother. So I was an only child for 4 years. So, and
only children. All right. The funny thing is, when we pour at events and things, it's the name that gets people to come over to us.
Yes.
And it wasn't even a thought. I mean, we didn't even think about marketing. We just thought, well, we're a collection of fathers and daughters. My older daughter works in the wine industry down in Healdsburg at a winery down there, and Sarah's dad and Sarah, myself. I mean, we thought fathers and daughters, and we got lucky.
Perfect.
It resonates.
I'm not gonna lie, this image right here.
I love that too.
I have a picture. So I have 2 older brothers, but I'm the only girl. So I am by far daddy's little girl.
Absolutely.
And I am 52 years old, and he is still daddy. He is not dad. I'm like, and people say, you still call your father daddy? Yeah, he's my daddy. Yes. And I talk to him and my mom all the time and whatever. But there is a picture of my father and me that somebody took. I have no idea, but it's an exact picture of me holding my daddy's hand while we're walking through, and that is.
So you've got to send me a copy of that picture, because
Okay.
I want to put together a page on our website of just that image, because I think so many people have that.
Yeah.
I have a picture of me and my dad walking on a beach in Chevening in Holland, like that.
Send it.
Yeah, I'll have to dig that out of the archives. That might require a box to go through.
Well, they'll be the first.
I got another indigenous yeast question here. So, some people, when, the general consumer, they buy a bottle of wine, they don't typically know, yeast, indigenous yeast, yeast that a winemaker, puts in whatever they want to achieve and whatever the number of the yeast is. If someone sees indigenous yeast and might say, whoa, I don't know what that is, I'm going to put that back. What would you say to the person that looks on the back of the bottle and sees, indigenous yeast, feral yeast? What would you say to them to say you need to buy that bottle of wine versus something that's commercial yeast?
I would say that I don't, I'm guessing, but I'm guessing that it would be difficult for a winery that produces large quantities of wine to have, even if they do use indigenous yeast, I think the process with the equipment and everything would kind of, I don't know, take the edge off of indigenous yeast, for lack of a better term. I was talking with Phil about the sanitization of the equipment and the difference between how he does it here and how it's done at larger wineries, and why he approaches it differently, which is a little bit lighter hand, so that it doesn't disturb the natural processes that are going on. So I would say to the person that's asking that question, I would say that my choice, if I had one, would always be indigenous yeast, just because it's part of the character of the wine that's not homogenized.
Perfect.
Now you actually, at least on the Pinot, it does not acknowledge that you're using indigenous yeast.
No.
So do any of your wines physically say that?
No, I've never thought about putting that on a label.
I think like what Debbie was trying to get at is that something that, like the big thing about German wines, right? There's German wine, people don't drink them because they can't pronounce them.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, Debbie, but is that like what you were talking about? Like,
well, I think that sometimes
indigenous yeast is.
Right. So ambient yeast, feral yeast. For an average consumer, they see that. Well, what is that? What am I getting in that? So, maybe I'll just buy the mass-produced bottle rather than the smaller producer bottle that's got the stuff on the label. I'm really not quite sure what it is.
I'm not sure that I would put it on the label. I think we should probably include it on the tasting notes for the people that are a little more.
Yeah, I agree.
Or connoisseurs, I guess. But I think for the average person, it might be confusing. And with that, it's like with a Gewürztraminer. It's a hand sell.
Yes.
And I think that, when somebody explains it to you and can hold your hand through the process, it's not as intimidating as it would be if you're just looking at a label and making a decision based on that.
Absolutely. I agree. And, I think that something on the label that can confuse people, it can be an issue. But on the other side, I don't think that your clientele, your marketing, I think they're pretty common. They're, indigenous yeast or feral yeast or ambient yeast. is all a common knowledge to who you're marketing. Right? If I wrong, like you're not getting the 22-year-old who knows nothing about wine just picking up your bottle, right?
That's true, except maybe for the pet nat.
True.
The
True.
pet nat, because of it, I think its price point, and our marketing is gearing it more toward people that it's a great crossover sparkling for somebody that's intimidated by champagne.
Right.
And so we had it at our Super Bowl party, and my friends, no beer? I said, no, just try this. And it was a great crossover for people who would normally just drink beer. So
yeah, I can see it.
It might be lost on the pet nat people, or at least our market for pet nat. But you're right. We may have a little bit more of a educated consumer for our other wines.
Right. But I do have to say, I keep going back. Debbie has probably heard this story 50,000 times. But when we were starting the winery, we were coming up with our label and all of that stuff. I had read research that says that you have 8 seconds to grab the consumer's eye on your label.
Yep.
That as you walk by, you have to grab their eye by 8.
Yes.
And I'm not gonna lie, this grabs the eye.
I would definitely. I'm a label buyer, and I would have reached for that over something else.
It's funny. We don't emphasize the name so much as the image.
Right.
Because yes. I think images people react to
without words.
People relate to that, especially if you're a daughter.
Yeah.
You relate to a lot of your.
All right, so I have to ask this question. So, how did Ella feel about having a wine named after her, and and Sarah? Like, how do they feel about having famous?
Well, Ella thinks it's very cool.
Okay.
And Sarah, the label was Sarah's the sparkling person in our family. Loves sparkling, seeks out sparkling. And so for Christmas of 2016, the label design was her Christmas present. She didn't know it was going to be called Sarah's Rustic Bubbles. So we kicked that idea around with the winemaker. Phil and I talked about what we should call it. And he said Rustic Bubbles. And I said, well, Sarah's the bubbles person. So I think she likes it.
Okay. And Ella, how old is Ella now? You said
Ella's 7.
She's 7.
She'll be 8 next month.
Oh, great!
You go around and say, "Haha, I've got a wine named after me."
No, but she likes going to the winery. She likes going through the vineyard. The funny story, when she was born in July of 2012, and we harvested the first vintage, I think about late August, early September, and we harvest at 2 and 3 in the morning. And we went out. We are involved in the harvest. We're involved in the bottling, the pressing. Our fingerprints are almost on every step of the process. And she was awake when we were out harvesting, so she was actually in a backpack while we were out.
Oh, that's great.
We pull the leaves out of the bins because there's no way we're fast enough to get the fruit off like the guys that do this all the time.
Right.
So they assign us to leaf picking out of the bins, which is akin to Lucy in the Chocolate Factory. Ella was in the backpack for her very first vintage while we were doing that.
Oh, that's all. I hope
that's wonderful.
Do you have pictures of that?
I have pictures. Well, no, I have pictures of her checking the fruit before the harvest.
Okay. That's awesome. That is so awesome. And so do you think she's going to continue the tradition and be in the wine industry?
I think so. It's kind of hard to tell at this age. Right now, she's really fascinated with innkeeping. She loves coming to be in and greeting the guests and everything. And she likes being at the vineyard. I mean, if she had to pick her happy place, I think it's at the vineyard. So I think there's a strong possibility.
Oh, all right. That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, we are kind of coming into our hour. And Deb, do you have any other questions
I don't have any that I can think of. Probably think of them afterwards. But
Yes, afterwards. So,
Yeah.
Guy, is there anything that? Oh, go ahead, Deb.
no, I was going to say I want to thank you guys for joining us and talking to us about your wines, your winery, your vineyards, indigenous yeast. I mean, it's been great.
Well, I was really intimidated by coming on the show because I'm not the winemaker, but you guys made me very comfortable.
Oh, good.
I hope I answered the questions all right.
You
Oh,
did
yeah.
everything. It's all about just conversation. And the thing that Debbie and I always say is, it's just about being comfortable with a glass of wine in your hand.
And having a conversation, and that's what we're about, Just
Well, I appreciate the chance to get the word out about fathers and daughters to a wider audience. And if anybody is interested or has questions, they can always shoot us an email.
Why don't you give all the information, like where they can find you online, on social media, and your email?
Sure. So on our website is fandscellars.com. So fndsellars.com. And on Facebook, Fathers and Daughters Cellars. On Instagram, the same. My email address is different because it's the email address I have for the inn, but they can always email me, guy@brewerygulchinn.com, like a beer brewery.
Oh, all right.
Yep. Or they can email you and you can send them on to me.
Yeah, I can forward it all to you. Yeah.
We'll be more than happy to be the middle people. We will definitely be happy to do that.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. And I'll be sending you guys out the bottles of cider.
Oh, well, thank you.
I can't wait.
Well, you know what? Lori and I will do the tasting together online.
Okay.
Cider.
And then you have to send me the pictures of you guys walking with your fathers.
Okay, we definitely,
I'm trading that for the cider.
Okay.
we definitely will. We definitely will. But
You gotta
thank
see the box I gotta go through for that one.
well,
Okay.
just so you know, I'm in California and the picture is in New Jersey, so it's going to be a little while before I get that. But I will send it to you when I get there.
Okay. Thank you.
But thank you so much, Guy. This has been such a pleasure. So, we really enjoyed talking to you and learning about your wine. And honestly, this Pinot kicks some serious butt. It
I
is
love
good.
it, Nat. And I'm telling you, I've had a few in the past that I was, didn't really care for, and I'm really liking this.
It was funny. There was one down in Sonoma that got us interested in pet nats. It was called Dirty and Rowdy.
Oh, yeah.
That's a fun one. But yeah, we're happy with our pet nat. In fact, after we finish here, we're going to have a glass of it. So
Awesome.
I'm almost halfway done with this bottle.
And when Debbie can, we can fly again and everything. Debbie's good to go. She comes visits me in California.
Yes.
Maybe we'll take a little road trip.
It would be so much fun to have you guys up to the vineyard. There's a spot up at the top of the vineyard where we like to do little picnics and overlooks the whole valley, and it's magical.
All right.
Definitely.
We would love to be there.
Okay.
We'll up on that.
All right.
Thank you so much, Guy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to everybody who joined. And Deb, our next letter is J, and it is
Jura.
Jura.
And that is, hold on. It's the third
Thursday.
Monday in July, whatever that is. And I just go to winephabet.com.
July.
I got it.
July 20th.
Here it is.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Guy. Thank you for sending us.
And here's the thing.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.